before they ever had the pump, they used to have the tractor working, you know, to sort of, well, you milk by hand, and then when they got machines, you had to have the tractor, and then eventually they got the pump.
So this was the pump room, in other words. So I only remember it as the pump room, but Mum's saying that they use the tractor.
Well, not in our day. Not in.
So we're going through now here to what was the main part. It was the races. So this is where the cows would obviously come in.
And they come in out the front, out there. They'd be brought in to out, that was the holding yard out there. Where all that dirt is was the holding yard. Then you gradually got a few, where that cement is out there.
That was enclosed there, so we'd get...
You get about 8 cows in there, and then you'd milk 8 cows at once. When they'd gone, you'd left them out, they'd all go out that way, and you'd bring the next 8 cows in.
So we always had 2 on each side though, so we in between each lot, once the one row of 8 cows went out, then we would put the food down in each area. They had a little a bin, didn't they, that they fed from on the sides, and that was usually grain, sometimes molasses, and we would fill up their food again. And they quite loved running in the cows because they knew they were getting fed, so it wasn't very hard once they knew where they were to run in. Hey Mum. And
I think too this is where you had to leg rope each one, so that when you're putting the machines on, they wouldn't kick you. So I think that was where some of the leg ropes, I'm not quite sure, but you had to leg rope them.
Too, what we had a bar here that's gone. And sometimes the heifers, of course, that they had their first calf, they would kick us because they weren't used to being milked. So I remember learning from Greg and Charlie, they tied their leg up, and they could be quite. Greg and Charlie would really tie them quite tightly, didn't they? And they'd grab it and they'd hook it up on here, and so that they couldn't be kicking us while we were putting the cups on them, you know.
One day though, we had the molasses, and we'd brought the molasses up, and nobody had turned it off. And we come up the next day, and we'd lost all the molasses, all on the floor, which was a lot of money to have lost that time. So we learnt a lesson then. But I don't know who that was, because Michael was born in 64, so I don't know. That wouldn't.
So
there was no Doyle born in 64. Remember, out here, it wasn't. See, that looks to have a bit of cement on it. Out there, it was always just dirt, and if it had rained, and the cows would be standing out there, by the time you went out, your gumboots would sink down that far. It was hard trying to pull the gumboots out of the muck and so forth.
Yeah, so mostly we wore gumboots. Yeah. And as Mum said, that was a little holding yard just there, and it was a bigger holding yard. So we would call the cows, and actually we'd round them up as well by motorbike in later years, but horse in early years. By the time we come here, we only rode the horse probably the first year or two, because then we went to motorbikes, and we arrived in 78 or 79, beginning of 79. But we'd often call the cows, you know, come on. I think we learned that from wherever. Come on, come on. And they knew that call, and they knew they were getting fed here, and a lot of them wanted to come, and it was amazing always seeing their response to that. Come on, come on.
And I see there's a Friesian here today. New little Friesian.
Oh, really? Oh, gee, they shrunk.
Wonder if we're getting any milk. What I see hasn't changed, Kath and Rod and Liz. Years ago, there was always lots of stinging nettle, and stinging nettle was really, really crook. So, Uncle Rod, if you put over here and all along there, that on the ground is all stinging nettle.
Do you want to lick the cake mix?
Oh. That's from the vagabond.
Well, I don't know what...
So, Mum, looking at the wood in the roof, it all looks like natural sort of wood, and so where do you think that came from?
Well, I have a feeling it would have come here from the farm. Couldn't be 100% sure. But Fred Giggler, who was Nana Giggler's brother-in-law, he was a real sort of, I think, bushman, and he had spent a lot of money. So I feel that's where it been mainly bush timber. I don't know about that. Some of it there has been milled. might be just wedged into there. Rod would know more there. See how that's sort of wedged in?
Yep.
I can't see any screws or bolts there.
See the wire? That was to use the wire to wire them down.
Just tied on.
Well, that's probably just what it was.
That's right.
I mean, you wouldn't get much like that today now. Oh, on our properties you would.
And they used to, Mum, when we'd milk the cows, so what we did when the cows came in, we would wash their udder. So we had a little hose that we washed their udder to get the dirt off them. And I'm sure health and safety probably didn't approve because we would have given them a quick wash.
Yes.
And then we'd test the milk. So we would squirt a little bit of milk on our hands and check that there was no lumps, any evidence of mastitis or anything like that. And then we would grab the cups and we put the cups on the cows, and then the milk would come up to a pipe that then would go in through the pump room and then through into the vat.
Yes.
And if they had some sort of, we used to use the betadine on some of them. Do you remember why we did that? We had a betadine dip that we would use on some of their teats.
You couldn't milk them if they had mastitis. You had to milk that separately because you couldn't let mastitis go into the and they had to be treated for mastitis.
Yeah, so
up each tent with
we had to put. So if they had mastitis, we actually had a separate little vat, and the way we checked for mastitis was literally that. We just tested and put it in our hands, and if there was lumps there, we saw, oh, they've got mastitis,
Yeah.
And so then we put them on a different. We had like a different little sort of.
I think you just milked it in the bucket.
They had a can, didn't they?
I'm not quite sure.
Where they would milk into, because they still need to be milked.
Because
but,
before the vat came in years ago, before our existence, when my husband was alive and when he was young, they just had cans and they used to have to take cans of milk. It wasn't a vat. So the vat made a big difference.
And up there, when the cows would come in the race, we did used to lock their heads in the race, but I don't think that's the original one.
It is.
It is it? They would come in and we would lock their head in the front here, but they were quite happy to come because there was always a big food bin in the front, so they would actually run straight into it. They'd put their head through, and then we'd lock this up. That was our routine. Lock it across there, and of course
there was a thing on it to lock it.
Oh, push it across.
Yes, I think this thing.
Yeah, that would lock their head, but we would lock that in there, and their head would come through, and we'd lock it just around their neck. But they were happy as Larry because they had their food bin in front of them here. Yeah. And the favourite cows, I had a lovely Guernsey that I used to be one of my favourites, and she would walk out here afterwards and she'd turn around and wait run out and grab a bit of extra grain and give her a little bit of grain. So she knew that because she'd just wait out there. So we got the grain from there. So there was a big silo, which obviously not there now, just out there, and we used to go and fill up the buckets. And there was one time I remember being stung by a bee. I don't remember that, Mum, because Davy Chicken raced me on his horse back to the, so there was sometimes bees and things like that around, so.
Well, I don't know where all those things are all gone, they've just disintegrated probably.
Do you remember how old the dairy this might be?
Look, I haven't got any idea, but I know Uncle Peter and them were babies, and they were born in the 1930 odd. Because Granny used to say, because she had children fairly quickly, that they had a swing in that because she and Mick had to milk, and they'd bring whoever the babies and that were and put them in the swing.
What year was Dad born again?
Well, Dad was born in 36, and Uncle Peter would have been born in 38, and Uncle Barry in 39. And I think in between Granny did lose a couple of babies.
But was the dairy, the dairy was around when Dad was born then?
Yeah.
Because you're saying Granny had to have them occupied while they were milking her and Mick Flynn. So do you have any memory of them having milked a long time before Dad and Uncle Peter?
Well, that's what I said. I will have a look in this booklet at home because I think it brings it in when they were milking. Dad didn't have a great lot to do with the dairy in his early life because Granny had so many children very quickly. He went in and stayed with Nana Ginther from I think about 4 4 years old, something like that. And so he only...
And that was at Milton, Mum.
That was at Milton, because Uncle Peter always said and Auntie Murray that they really didn't know him that much till later years. Where he had a lot to do with it was when we came down here at the end of 78, and Auntie Murray and Uncle Dan were mainly then on their turf, so he sort of took over with Granny the running of the place. Because I was home, I came up and did a lot with Charlie and Greg, and that was when we had a lot to do with the farm.
So you milked, Mum. How often would you have milked her in those days? That was in the early 80s and
till the dairy. Well, I milked quite a lot, or I'd come over to supervise because neither Greg nor Charlie really could read or write much, and I'd often come over. So, you're right.
I'll try to get you to move in close again.
So,
That didn't
for
work.
the years that we came from 79 through till the dairy closed, I did have a lot to do with the dairy. Granny was still alive till about 93, I think, and we discussed, and it's funny, I play this game called Hand and Foot, and you have to write the scores in it, and we're still writing the scores, and it is a book from the dairy in Dad's handwriting that we used to call the paddocks different names, so we'd know, we'd say to Gregory, we'll do the dentist paddock or something.
What did you go?
Well, we all gave the paddocks different names because Greg and Charlie, they couldn't read or write, so we'd call a paddock, I've got a lot of the names at home, so that they would know which paddocks. And I said, we're still using this old book for cards, still to this very day. Yesterday I used it, and that was before Dad died, that it's got stuff written in it.